So it's about 5:07 in the morning San Francisco time, 3:05 in the afternoon UK time on Wednesday the 26th of June 2018. I've now been in San Francisco for about a week, 6 days, 5.5 days. I noticed when I was sat in the airport lounge, now you'd think that being an astrologer I would plan my flight, okay, but the San Francisco thing that I'm doing at the moment happened spontaneously. 2 weeks before I took off, I had no knowledge I was coming. It was one of those lastminute.com things that happened, and I found a place to be with where I could see people, and I found a place to stay, and it all just fell into place. So when something like that happens, you go with it. So I didn't have a chance to plan my flight and plan my stay astrologically. I just went with it on instinct. As I sat in the departure lounge, I thought, let's have a look at what's going on in the sky. And to my absolute horror, I realised that at the time I flew, there was a really exact conjunction of Mercury and Mars and the North Node in Cancer opposite the Moon conjunct Saturn and Pluto on the South Node in Capricorn. And I actually flew as that Moon passed over Saturn and Pluto, and I looked at this and I thought, oh my God, that is a classic accident aspect. And then I just thought, well, you know what, I can't change it. What am I going to do? Not go? So I thought, let's just go and use it, instead of being negative, use it as a really positive aspect, because remember, planets impel, they don't compel. Now, over this last week, I've been watching the planets day by day, and I've seen Mars and Mercury both gradually moving apart, but not too far, because Mars is still going quite fast. Mercury is slowing down, ready for its retrograde phase. So from about a week ago, for the next 2 weeks, there is this ongoing Mercury-Mars conjunction, both in late Cancer and then in early Leo. And the fact that it's been on the North Node in mid-late Cancer suggests to me there's a little bit more to this than meets the eye, especially with Saturn and Pluto together in mid-late Capricorn on the South Node. Now, to the astrologers amongst you, any astrologer worth their salt is going to be looking at the event at the astrological events of this last week. Mercury conjunct Mars opposite Saturn conjunct Pluto on the North and South Node. And they're going to be thinking, wow, this is a pretty monumentous aspect. It's really big. And this is only a foretaste of what's to come. We're heading into a Mercury retrograde. And I find it really significant that the Mercury retrograde starts at around 4 degrees of Leo, which is a point that has been hit by eclipses over the last couple of years, 4 degrees Leo, 4 degrees Aquarius, and will be hit again by a very weak partial eclipse of the new moon somewhere towards the end of January next year. So there seems to be a lot happening at the start of Leo at the moment. Also, in the next few days, Mars will move into Leo. I think it's happening around July the 1st. And of course, on July the 2nd, there is a total eclipse of the sun. So having had a discussion with someone this morning about this, it's made me realise, actually, yes, there's two different types of effects on a solar eclipse. There's the way that it actually affects the area that the eclipse is over. For example, this eclipse will be over the South Pacific. It will start around Tahiti, sweep across the South Pacific, and then finish around the coast of Chile. But it will also be a partial eclipse over much of the west coast of South America. So people in this area and the South Pacific are likely to be affected. But it's also going to affect those people whose charts strongly have an influence around 10 degrees of the cardinal signs, and those countries. For example, America with its sun at 12 degrees Cancer and its Saturn at 13, 14 degrees Libra. Eclipse is probably going to have a big effect upon this. But we've got Mars moving into Leo, followed by a total eclipse of the sun within 24 hours, followed by Mercury going retrograde within a few days after that. These are tumultuous times. This is easily the most compressed and condensed period of 2019, astrologically speaking, so far, and probably over the rest of the year. Now, when I actually look at the news with what's going on, obviously, because of the news I get is primarily based around America, Europe, Britain. But I know that there's a lot of issues going on in Australia around the relative political instability of recent times. I know there's a lot of major change trying to be forced through in India with the rise of the Indian Me Too movement and the rise against the misogyny that's endemic. The misogyny and racism that's endemic in India against both women and people like the Dalit population. Europe is a mess, especially with the heat wave at the moment. America is, one of the things I've realised is that there's a bubble in America of the political elite and the media, and then there's the rest of the people. And of course, the American people are the salt of the earth. They're solid, down to earth, in touch with the real world. And they like to moan and complain about their politicians, but they don't really give a damn. And the political elite and the media in America seem to be living in a bubble. They seem to think they're more important than they are. And sure, with the American ongoing pronouncements from the government around the refugees in Mexico, around Iran, and if there was going to be a big war with Iran, I genuinely think it would have happened by now. But I'm not ruling it out yet. But I think if we get through to, second week of August, I think it's going to fade into the background, to be honest. The Mercury-Mars conjunction on the North Node opposite Saturn-Pluto was the trigger point. And if it didn't happen then, and they did appear to pull back from the brink, then it's not going to happen. In Britain, my country, we have the Laurel and Hardy show in the political world. There is a case for saying that the crown princes of British and American politics are going to have their way in the short term, but in the long term, they're going to utterly destroy their own political parties. And one of the things we're seeing, I think, worldwide is the end of old political systems. They're creaking in their grave. In Britain and perhaps in America, the two-party system, and in Australia, is beginning to draw to a close. And I'm sure that in years, certainly decades to come, but years, we're going to see much more consensual and referenda-based decisions, both locally and nationally. In Britain, the leadership of the Conservative Party between Jeremy Hunt, who's a Scorpio with a moon in Gemini, and Boris Johnson, who's a Gemini with a moon in Scorpio, is just ridiculous. Part of me wants Boris Johnson to win because that will hasten the demise of the Conservative Party and it will make them unelectable for 20 years to come. Mind you, the opposition in Britain is just as bad, really. I couldn't bring myself to vote for any of them because they're utterly disconnected with the real world, utterly. And I feel the same to a certain extent in America. So, looking at where we are now, Mercury is just about to move into Leo. Mars will move into Leo in about 4 or 5 days, 5, 6 days time. There's an eclipse in a week's time. These are tumultuous times. And for those astrologers out there who are practicing or learning or studying or working consciously with astrology, these are times where we need to be reassuring people that the madness and the craziness of current times is not permanent. It's not always going to be this manic or crazy or hectic. And indeed, later this year, as Jupiter moves forward, and especially as it gets into the latter part of Sagittarius and then moves into Capricorn, we can expect a degree more optimism and fortune. And I'm already looking at next year and the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. Yes, let's get past the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January, but once that's over, well, it's going to take a year to get over, but we also have a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction for 8 months next year, and that could be a very fortunate thing. More on that one later. Meantime, this is Astrological Ramblings from the Coalface in the beautiful city of San Francisco. How lucky am I? Catch you later, world. Back in England in a few days. Bye.